to say welcome and thank you for coming, both to MICE and to the Visualizing Mental Health panel. I'm Dan Mazur, one of the co-directors of MICE, and I'm coordinating the panel programming. And as well as thanking you for being here, I'd like to thank here for being here. In other words, thank you, Boston University, our new host. This is MICE's 13th year. We managed to persevere during the first 2 years of the pandemic with a virtual show in 2020 and a smaller outdoor show in 2021. But this is our first year back in a full-scale live show. Not coincidentally, it is also the first year that Boston University is offering in the School of Visual Arts a graduate degree in visual narrative, which is what we have to call comics if you're giving out a graduate degree. And this is to be a terrific program led by Jill Christian Gill, a great cartoonist and educator, and longtime friend and participant in MICE. So if you think that that sort of program interests you or anyone you know, check out the one that just started here. I also want to explain that MICE is produced by BCAF, the Boston Comic Arts Foundation. It's a 501c3 charitable organization that we began as a way to collect donations tax deductible for MICE. So if you'd like to make a tax donation based on what we do, that would be great. Just look at the website or go to the welcome desk. As well as MICE, we also sponsor the Boston Comics in Color Festival and various educational programs in the area, and hopefully soon supporting individual artists as well. So if that sounds good to you, make a donation. If making a donation isn't your thing, do consider volunteering for one of those shows. It's a lot of fun, a lot of help, and a great way to be part of the local comics scene. So with that all set, I will introduce today's panel, today's moderator. We're very happy to have A. David Lewis. A. David Lewis is an assistant professor of English and Health Humanities at MCPHS University, where he teaches on graphic medicine. He's the co-editor of Graudins Images, Religion in Comic Books and Graphic Novels, as well as Muslim Superheroes, Comics, Islam, and Representation. And he is the editor-in-chief of the Graphic Medicine Review Open Access Journal. And now I will stop blocking panelists.
Thank you, Dan. Let's give Dan a hand, please. And let me echo Dan's sentiment. Thank you all very much for being here today, being at the show, being part of our panel. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce all of you to our panelists today, beginning with Emma Grove, a classically trained animator who prefers to work with paper and pens on paper. Emma Grove, she, her, shifted to making comics and children's books when the industry switched to computer animation. After over a decade of writing and illustrating children's books and comics, all unpublished, she decided to try her hand at an autobiographical graphic novel. This is her first published work. Please welcome Emma Grove. Gabriel Joy Reid, any pronouns, that's what they wrote, any pronouns, is a writer, filmmaker, and illustrator originally from Kansas City, Kansas. They are currently in their 5th and final year at Northeastern University across town, majoring in media arts and screen studies. In 2020, they released their first graphic novella, Healing Us, a visual exploration of Black mental health in America, designed to encourage a deep and urgent discussion on the intersection of racial justice and mental health. Please welcome Gabriel. Alex Graudins, pronoun she, they, is a cartoonist based in southern Rhode Island, known for her YA and autobio works tackling loneliness and anxiety. She served as artist for Science Comics, The Brain and History Comics, The Great Chicago Fire, and recently debuted her original graphic memoir, Improve, How I Discovered Improv and Conquered Social Anxiety. Alex. And Cara Bean, she, her, is a cartoonist and art educator specializing in comics about mental health. Her comic Snake Pit Notes on Adolescent Depression and Suicide and Let's Talk About It, a graphic guide to mental health, have laid the foundation for her current project, an in-depth mental health book speaking directly to a child audience. Cara Bean, everyone. Now, the way this is going to go, I've prepared a few questions for the panel that I'll just open widely to them. But first, we're going to hear from Cara about something.
All right, I'm an art teacher as well, and I have an activity. So did everybody get one of these little mice? And if you didn't, we have more. Okay. So you can either use a pencil or use your finger. And can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to breathe a little before we begin our panel, just to relax, just to kind of chill and all just get comfortable in our chairs. So let's start at the B with, I'm going to use my finger, I don't have a pencil. And then we're going to, on the blue, inhale. On the pink, exhale. On the blue, inhale. So let's start. E, E, breathe in. A, breathe out. T, breathe in. H, breathe out. E, breathe in. Then go all the way over to the mouse. Okay, now you're on the mouse and you're exhaling on the nose. Inhaling on the paw. These are deeper ones now. Exhaling on the foot. Inhaling on the tail. And big exhale to finish. On the mouse. There we go. Now we're ready.
Now we're ready. Thank you. Very nice. So as I was saying, we're going to start with a few just opening questions for the panel, open it to them widely, and then we will allow some time during the second half of the hour for your Q&A questions, questions you may have about mental health, mental wellness, comics, and so forth. But first, we have to do origin stories. First, I need to ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind speaking on what brought you to comics, and more specifically, what led you to explore mental health issues through the comics medium. Emma, would you mind starting?
Well, I think the biggest comic strips I loved when I was a kid, you can see a lot of it in my work, was Charles Schulz's Charlie Brown. What I always loved about the Charlie Brown comics was their simplicity, how he never put anything in the panel that didn't absolutely have to be there. Like if Charlie Brown and Linus were outside, he would draw one tree with a little bit of grass shrub, and that's it. So I liked, I don't know, that was my biggest comics influence when I was a kid. But I've done many other things like animation, children's books, scripts, things like that. So.
Fantastic. Gabriel?
I think working in comics came from a desire to work actually in animation. And I've been drawing for as long as I can remember, and I always wanted to work in cartoons and drawing through that. But I think comics is such a great entryway into working in sequential art, and you can kind of do it with whatever you have, which I think is really great. And I started again, this was my first graphic novella, the first actual comic I actually printed. And I did that through school, where I just wanted to make a project and using a different medium. And I've been hooked ever since. Mice was actually my first comic expo back in 2019, and the first one I ever went to. Wow. And it's kind of crazy. I'm here now. Yeah.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Wow. I had sort of a late relationship with comics. My extent growing up was whenever I would grab the Archie Digest when my mom was paying for groceries. I was mostly an animation kid, like Powerpuff Girls, Sailor Moon. And I learned in middle school, I was really obsessed with the Disney movie Meet the Robinsons. I did not know art was like a field you could go into, but my friend got me the art book for my birthday, and I spent the whole birthday party just looking through it. I felt so bad. But I realized that like storyboarding was an option. So originally I was gearing for that, but then when I was in high school, I would go to my local library a lot, and they had a whole graphic novel section. And I was used to like reading the manga, but when I was younger, manga was sort of like, oh, that's for girls, that's not comics, it doesn't count. Now I'm like, forget that. But so for the longest time, I was like, oh, I don't read comics, I just read manga. But I started reading books like Brain Camp that Faith Iron Hicks illustrated. I read Raina Telgemeier's drama, and I was just starting to realize like, oh, there's other stories you can tell with comics. It's not just superheroes, it's not just like these kids in high school. So it sort of put me on this path of like, it's a nice happy medium between writing and animation. And also I feel like expressing yourself through comics is very beneficial to mental health. And actually, I didn't seek out like doing autobio work, it just kind of happened to me. I had a college professor who, one of our class assignments was to do a week's worth of like diary comics essentially, and I basically just didn't stop after that. And then it just happened that I was talking about mental health a lot because that's what I was dealing with. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. I like what you just said. Like, that's what I'm talking about because that's what I'm dealing with. And I feel that way too. When I think back to just pure drawing, for me has always been a coping mechanism for stress. Like and then over time, because I did it so much and my mom drew, so it was a thing that you could do in my house. I got better at it than most kids, and then it was a sense of self-esteem. And I didn't study comics till much later in life. I studied painting and portraiture and fine art kind of stuff, and then I became a high school art teacher, thus this, sorry. And when I started teaching, I found comics. I sort of found it a little bit before, maybe it was my late 20s, and I found Million Year Picnic. Tony, love you. And I was like, oh, a friend. I had been like photocopying drawings I was doing from my sketchbook. I worked at BU actually, small world, and I worked in the music department, copying music for the music professors, and I was chained to the copy machine. I just had to copy music all day. So I get bored. I'm an artist, so I'm like, what if I copied my sketchbook and then I drew on it and then I mailed it to my friends and I was just using it because I was there. And one of my friends said, this looks like comics. And I was like, what do you mean? I don't make comics. I don't know what you're talking about. And then he took me to my picnic and then showed me the independent comics. And I was like, oh, like I had no idea how cool this could be. I think I picked up Nate Powell's comic. He had done an autobio piece about working with children with disabilities and issues, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this just totally speaks to my heart. So slowly over time, it takes a long time to start showing people that you're making comics. Like you're like making them, but you're like not showing anybody. And then eventually I started making comics, and of course my students love comics, and so we started a comics club, and we were like doing all this comic activity. And while teaching, the thing that came up the most in the art classroom for me, like even I had a lot of art training, but I didn't have training in mental health, and that was everywhere, all the time happening. And I didn't have a way, I didn't feel confident. Like if I wanted more education, that's what I wanted. Any training that I could have and any understanding I could have. So I started attending talks, and so that little zine that I have that David mentioned was Snake Pit was just my notes from attending a workshop about teen suicide and depression. And because I'm a cartoonist and I've been drawing, all my notes are visual, and people are saying, this is really useful. Can I use this? Can I borrow this? Can you do one about this? Can you do? And all of a sudden I'm drawing. They kept being like, this is gonna go away. Like, this is too hard to draw about mental health. Like, this is too difficult. But it has not gone away. I've gone deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
And yet here we are.
And here we are. Yeah, so that's how I got here.
That's fantastic. Can I actually follow up on that, Karen? We'll go back the other way this time. who generally speaking is your target audience? And have you also connected with any unintended audiences as well with your work?
Definitely. I kind of feel like, I guess like Mari Sendek feels, you know, that like I write for myself and kids seem to like it, but adults like it too. Or like I like the old Muppets where it's like funny to adults and to kids, and like that's my jam where it's kind of everybody can be there. I'm currently working on a book. It won't be out until 2024, but that's the thing when you work with the publisher, they're like, who's the age group? Well, who does this go, you know, like for selling it or whatever. And so they don't like my attitude of like, everybody can like it. So I think it's kind of being pitched towards like older middle school, high school, but in my mind, like a sophisticated 9-year-old could totally read my book and be like, I get it, you know, it's fine. But yeah, I think most kids can handle things, and they want to talk about it, and it's a release for them when they can have something to talk about.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Alex,
Yeah.
same question to you. Who is your audience, and have you picked up any unintentional audiences along the way?
I think I very much have like the same experience where like I don't have an intended demographic, but you know, publishers want you to. Because I think for me, I'm always writing for my younger self in the sense of like, especially with mental health comics, it's like, these are the things I wish I knew at the time when I was going through these things. Like I did not have that sort of resource to tell me like why I was feeling the way I was feeling. So even though it's technically geared towards young adults, like I think anybody dealing with it should be able to read it. And so I have a style that mostly I think people gear towards middle grade. But I mean, even when I was in middle grade, I was reading older stuff. Like, I don't want to be the person to be like, nudge, nudge, keep reading it, but it's like, nothing's going to stop them. And like you said, kids can handle a lot more than people give them credit for, especially if they're already going through the things.
Yeah.
Like, they should be able to read up on it. So I think the nice thing is my demographic, while people want it to be specific, I think it's just people who relate to it. Like I have a lot of people come up to me who's like, oh, like I went through the same thing, or like I just found this really relatable. And that's kind of what I want to do, is to make people realize that like, okay, like you're fine. Even if someone near you is not going through this thing, it doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean like you're an outlier. It's like, this is something that people go through. It's just, we're in a society that does not like to talk about it. So this is me talking about it.
I think it depends on the work, but like with Healing Us specifically, it was kind of like, I feel like I was kind of writing for my younger self quite a bit. And then as I published it, I independently like put it on the internet or whatever. And so my audience, my immediate audience was just like my family and friends.
Yeah.
And it ended up becoming like so important that year too, because I finished it in March of 2020. And this is like right before the pandemic started. And then the resurgence of Black Lives Matter happened in June after George Floyd was murdered. And so it was just like, everyone was like looking for Black art at that time. And I was talking about a lot of those like issues, those systemic issues that suddenly everyone seemed to be noticing, even though they've been going on forever and ever. But yeah, so it kind of formed from that. I think I definitely was writing it a lot for just like my family members who, you know, this is such a stigma to talk about mental health in Black communities quite a bit. So to encourage people to continue discussing it, and then just for everyone else who wants to know about it, and maybe in a more accessible way and through the comic. So yeah, I think the audience kind of formed through that, but definitely my friends and family for sure.
It has grown from your friends and family.
Yeah.
Emma, what about yourself?
Well, it's kind of a tricky question.
Okay.
So when I'm working on my work, I write for me. I write what I would like to actually personally see. But the thing that kept me going through the making of the third person book was, like, if it was just for me, I would have given up on it, you know, months and months and months before. But my main motivation was I thought maybe it could help people. And that was my main thing. I thought maybe if I could make whoever was reading it feel a little bit less alone and see somebody else's struggles on the page. Because I think one of the things that attracts people to other people's stories is being able to empathize with that person and seeing like, oh, well, they got through this, maybe I can too.
And you were saying just before the panel started, you actually have had that experience, someone saying
Yeah,
that it did connect for them.
Yeah, a clinician actually approached me yesterday and said that she actually recommended it to a few, which was, honestly, that's what kept me going. I'm like, if this could help even one other person.
That's really wonderful.
You know, like for example, like if you're an abused woman in an abusive situation and you got out of it and recovered, seeing somebody else's story on the page, like, oh, they got through it, maybe I can too. That was a big motivation in keeping going with the book. So.
Fantastic. I'm going to do my professor thing now. I hope you'll all bear with me. But I want to bring up that Comics and the Body author, Esther Sezip, offers the theory that graphic narratives, by virtue of being drawn either on paper or digitally, retain the marks of their creators' bodies, and in turn convey a sense of their vulnerability. How would you respond to that idea in your own work? Do you express or display or mark it with a sort of personal vulnerability? Would anyone like to field that? Any hands in the class? Yeah, please.
Yeah, one of the reasons, so basically I was working in the animation industry and everything switched digitally to computers. And I just was stubbornly set on my paper and pencils. There's an immediacy that you get when you're putting an image on a page, when it's by your own hand, when there's not that remove that you just don't get any other way. So that's why I've stuck to it. There is a personal connection. I think when you're doing a comic or any work, it's basically you're literally talking to whoever is viewing it. And the closer you can be to talking to whoever you're talking to through your work is, I think.
And particularly when the topic is your own mental health or
Correct,
the subject of mental health.
Right.
It might be particularly vulnerability making.
Definitely.
I'm seeing a lot of nods, yes.
Absolutely. Like, I relate to what Cara was saying earlier about how, like, it's a coping mechanism, drawing. And so, like, being able to, like, visualize things, too, I think is just incredibly powerful. This is actually something that Matthew told me, Matthew Noah, at the Harvard Library. But, like, graphic medicine is, like, so great because we speak in metaphor. We speak in metaphor when we're talking about pain, and we're talking about health. You know, it's like, instead of saying like, oh, my chest is hurting, it's like, you know, there's an elephant on my chest. That's the kind of thing. Yeah. So I think it's a very visceral way to like understand different situations, and also like just deal with your own stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could relate it back to improv, because I have to, that's what my book is about. But there's such a vulnerability of even just being on stage, like us up here, this is super vulnerable. And the moment you put out a story that's about you, you're already like participating in this vulnerability. And in order to do that, you need to have like a safe space of like, okay, like I'm gonna put this out into the world. I need to make sure that like no harm is gonna come to me from it, and I'm gonna shy away from the world and never do this again. So I think books and the internet are partially great at that. Not amazing, but it's nice where you can just like sort of throw it out there and then just be like, this is not my problem anymore. It's out there, I have told my story. So that vulnerability is already so difficult. But I feel like for me personally, aside from like a narrative perspective, because I feel like I've had practice with narrative, because like I go to therapy. So I have practice talking about what I'm feeling, and I'm basically just writing down what I've learned. But physically, like with this book, I had illustrated it with pen and ink, like in hand, because when I was in college, I very much used like a lot of traditional materials. So I was like, oh, if it's my first autobio book, maybe I'll go back to that. But because of it, I have not done it in a while, so you can see like my shaky hand in it. So like there's those like personal, like physical vulnerabilities, as well as like how I draw myself, where it's not like the ideal. I do think the more I draw myself, the more I start looking like Doug Funny. It's not intentional, but it keeps happening. But it's just like literally every single thing that goes into a comic is a reflection of the artist. Like how they decide to draw something, what they decide to include. Everything that's included is on purpose, even if it just seems like the most minute detail. So comics as a whole is just incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Totally. So yeah, one thing I think I can have a couple things that came up in my head. One is that the comic that you saw that was like for the Center for Cartoon Studies was a commission piece for students. And that piece I did with a group of cartoonists and a group of specialists, and it was a big team, and I drew rabbits, and I just drew it like just to make the information easier to absorb. But meanwhile, I am working on a book where I'm being very vulnerable, and it's me, and I'm in the book, and you haven't read it yet because it's not out. And I think that the book I'm making is going to connect much better because it is me speaking directly to the reader, which is what I intended to do. It just took me a really long time to figure. And when I needed to, there are certain topics, like I'm covering a lot of topics, but the ones that touch my life or are the most intimate, and I'm like, I get that pit in my stomach, oh my God, I'm gonna write this down, like, here we go. I found I needed to like sit on the floor of my mother's basement. Like I need to be, if I could go to the center of the earth and like write it from way in the ground, like I just was like, whoa, I need to get lower, lower, lower. So I would do it in my sketchbook by hand. And I think there is magic in drawing as a teacher. And in just someone, I like to tell this story, just how powerful drawing is, even if your drawings don't turn into comics, even if you never show anyone your drawings. One day I was doing an art festival, and I had like a table with an activity, but it was the end of the day, and I was done like interacting with the public, and I was purely drawing for myself, like completely ignoring anyone coming near, and just drawing like a big dragon, and I was having a good time by myself. And this dad came by with his two little girls, and he was like talking to his friends. He didn't care what I was doing, and the girls just gravitated towards me. And normally I like greet people, but I didn't even say hi to them. I just continued on in my dragon, and they started drawing their things. And we just sat there drawing silently, but near each other. And the dad's like, hey, we gotta go, come on, girls. And they both hugged me really tight and laughed. And I was like, all we did was draw. Like, I never even spoke to them. Like, I never even made eye contact. But it was like we connected, and that's the power in drawing. And I feel like that comes through in a comic, that you're reading the words, you're understanding the details of the story, but you're feeling this like unspoken thing too, of the bend to the hand, or the way that you shade, or the way that you like have a funny little way that you end a line. And if whether you know it or not, you're feeling that too.
Hmm. I think the two of you touched upon the other question that I wanted to ask when we're talking about comics versus comics narratives. Drawing for drawing itself, or drawing to propel a story. There's comic studies scholar Jared Gardner. He suggests that with long-term or chronic conditions, imposing a narrative with an end or a conclusion might not align with the ongoing nature of the illness itself. Were any of you challenged by having to find like just a closure to your book? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm like, absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I went from doing just like little diary comics in my sketchbook to doing like a whole book, and they want it like like there's a start, there's an end. And for me, it was hard, not only because when I started this book, it was like maybe a year or two after the actual events had happened. So in my head, I was like, well, it's not over. I'm still kind of doing improv a little, and like my journey is still happening. I still have social anxiety. Like I've just gotten a lot of like new coping mechanisms for it. So in my head, it's like it's not over, but you still have to like find like a pinpoint to like put it there. And I also found that there were times where I had to rearrange stuff that happened just so there's like a flow to it. Because originally when I scripted it, it was like a good thing would happen, a bad thing would happen, a good thing would happen, and it was just like up and down. And it's like if you're reading that, there's such like a whiplash to that, and there's also a whiplash to experiencing it too. So like having to restructure your life into a story is very odd, because it's like life doesn't make narrative sense, but you have to make it for people to like digest it, I guess. And one thing that I found while working on it is that there was just, God, my thought just went out of my head. But it was interesting too in that perspective, because one of the things we were being taught in improv that I mentioned in the book is this thing called the 8-beat story spine, which is basically like if you need something to fall back on in a scene, just remember like beats of a scene will be like once upon a time and every day until one day, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, until finally, and ever since that day. So it's like just this way a story can be told. And my editor actually had the suggestion of, oh, why don't you end the book on an 8-beat story, like sum up everything? And I was like, oh. It was a very weird experience because you're not used to thinking of your life as a story. But I definitely feel like the flow of it makes more sense when it's just kind of random. And I think one of the reasons I have such a hard time with, like, I've had some people reach out to me like, oh, why don't you do like a middle grade book about this? And for me, it's like all of my experience that I would talk about came as like an accumulation of different moments in time. Like there was never one point in like a middle school experience or anything like that that I could talk about, because for me, I was learning like every single year. So that's also partially why my book ended up being YA, is because I'm 22 in the book. But it's just like, that's when I was out of college, that's when like I was the loneliest, that's when I had the opportunity to do improv. So it's very difficult to narrow down. I don't know if anybody else also had that issue.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of graphic memoir is like hard to end because it's still ongoing, like it's still happening.
I'm still alive.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
But don't you wish it was happily ever after?
Yeah, okay, I wish.
So it's hard to have closure, I guess. But I mean, Healing Us was really difficult because it's very small. It's only a 20-page comic. Expect me to talk about like all of systemic racism in 20 pages. But in that, I think I tried to put stuff at the end to like allow people to continue to research it, to continue finding more information about it. And I also added discussion questions at the end too, because I think it's like it's to ask the reader to be active and engaged in it as well. And even like in the book, there's kind of this motif of like the cracks being healed. And even at the end, it's still not fully healed. But I wanted to like show that it's still like an ongoing process, like you were saying. So yeah, I definitely relate to that though.
Did anyone else want to comment on the no happily ever after, particularly with mental health issues, but with just storytelling one's life or storytelling about a particular subject?
I will add to what Gabriel said in that one of my favorite takeaways with books is when they make me think about, this sounds very selfish, when they make me think about myself. But I mean, like, it makes you reflective. And it was funny because when I first like got the finished copies, my parents were reading through it, and they started having all of these like conversations with me after of like, oh, I felt this way, and like, oh, this time and like, at work, and I was like, why have we never talked about this? So the fact that you're able to have these conversations, and also it's like we've ended our story, but at the same time it's still continuing because you're starting to realize something about your own story, your own life narrative. So in a way, it's like we put a pause on us, and we're like, no, now it's your turn. You tell us what's up.
In just a moment, I'd love to open up the conversation to questions for the audience. But before we do, I do want to ask what each of you hopes to do next. Some of you have been talking about upcoming projects that you have. Is it going to be focused on mental health or going off in the direction of other topics?
Well, what I'm working on currently is, now that I've gotten this autobiographical work basically out of my system, I'm like finally able to feel mentally healthier, and I'm working on fiction again, which is actually healing in its way. It's still very personal. I think anytime you do anything as an artist, there's going to be a part of yourself in the work. I think it's inevitable. So it's fictional, but it's still very, 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 very personal to me. So that's what I'm doing now.
Nice. Gabriel?
Well, I think I'm a comic artist now. That's crazy. But
One of us.
so I'm in my final year at Northeastern, and I'm working on a comic for my final project there.
Awesome.
It's also focusing on mental health, also focusing on Blackness, but now I'm bringing in gender identity, which is very fun. And it's also like a little bit of like a fictional memoir, so it's going to be a superhero story.
Ooh, I love that.
So look out for that, I guess. Sounds awesome.
For me, I'm on a bit of a break right now because after, like, right before this book, I had done History Comics Chicago Fire. I was basically doing like book after book, and I burnt myself out, which is another mental health topic we can talk about, pushing yourself a little too hard. So I gave myself a little rest this year. But I do, like, for projects in the future, I definitely think I'm gearing towards a fictional story next, just because when you're not only when you're talking about yourself for an entire book, and also like at least 2 years worth of work. It's difficult because it's like, when you draw as like escapism, and now you have to draw yourself, it's like, well, I don't have this outlet anymore to just leave, which is also why I got super into D&D at the time I was working on this. I needed the fantasy. But yeah, I feel like it's inevitable that your personal like aspects come through in stories. So for me, like the next story I want to work on involves another kid with social anxiety. They just deal with it in a different way that's not improv, and also meet other people who are going through similar things, but not exactly showing it, and sort of the ramifications of that, of hiding it versus being very obvious about it.
And Cara, you mentioned you're working on a project right now.
Yeah, so I've been working on this book forever, but it will be released. I have to finish it this spring, and then it'll be released in like March 2024, and I think the title is going to be Here I Am Me. And then a longer subtitle. But so that I have to, this is my vacation this weekend. I'm right back to work after this. I'm plowing away, trying to get it done.
Happy vacation.
Yeah, this is really good. Like, this is really energizing my battery.
Good.
Keep going.
Very good.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't call out a few other works. If you're interested in mental health and mental illness as well, there's Marbles by Ellen Forney. There's RX by Rachel Lindsay, somewhere here in the audience. I won't. Okay, she's waving. I wasn't gonna point to her, but she's there. Also, you mentioned D&D. I was just recently reading Just Roll With It.
Yes, my friend Veronica and Lee made that.
It's a fantastic
I
book,
love those
both
guys.
about Dungeons and Dragons and about role playing and about obsessive compulsive disorder. And for that matter, portions of Alison Bechdel's Fun Home are also about obsessive compulsive disorder. So you can find this topic being explored in a number of comic works, including those of our panelists today. What I'd like to do is I'm going to just offer a few topics that we could cover, if this stimulates any ideas or any comments, but I'd like to welcome your questions. We might have to amplify you with a microphone, so, oh, Dan has the microphone. All right, so if you wouldn't be too shy by raising your hand, we'll take a few questions from the audience. Nice number. I like this class. You all pass. Congratulations.
I have two questions, but should I do one or both?
Hit us with both of them, and we'll let it wash over the panelists and see what they want to tackle.
Rad. Okay. So first question: how do you deal with the vulnerability of making comics about yourself?
Yep.
And then the second question is, how do you settle on what subject you want to talk about with your works?
I think we discussed vulnerability somewhat. Do you want to elaborate a bit on that, or on just looking for what you're going to address next?
Like self-care or anything?
There you go.
I think it's just when you see a pattern start to emerge. Like for me, because before I did a whole book, I'd do like one-page diary comics, and I would just see me repeating like the same topic, and I was like, maybe I should just expand on that instead of repeating the same stuff over and over of what I'm going through. So I think it's really just a matter of whatever you're working on for yourself personally, like whatever your focus is on. It kind of gives you an excuse to elaborate on it more, not only for the purpose of other people who would like that advice, but also for you, and you have the opportunity to do the research and put in the work for yourself on top of actual work, because sometimes when you try and do it for yourself, you're like, it's not as important. But if you're like, if it's for work, there's a deadline, so I gotta do it, which is not healthy, but I mean, hey, if it forces us to take care of ourselves, then I guess it's okay.
I think it's really magical and amazing what happens in the exhibition hall over here. And I think that's how it started for me. I'm not sure if it's similar, where you make a little tiny comic that's so little that you might just walk by and not see it, and you maybe share something kind of private that you can't believe, but you're just whatever you're comfortable with. And then you see someone read it and go, thank you, I really love that. And then you go, well, that wasn't so bad. Well, maybe that was kind of good. Well, maybe I'll do another, maybe a little bit bigger, or maybe I'll put this one on my webpage, or whatever you feel comfortable with. And it's a snowball. For me, anyway, it was like I didn't jump in right away being totally vulnerable. Like it is a process.
And those little serotonin hits.
Yeah, like, oh, that was kind of nice. Yeah.
That's great advice.
Can we take another question from the audience? I like this audience. This is so. Oh, Dan, I was going to let you pick. Yes, let's go over here with the blue shirt, blue with balloons.
That's nice, 2 blue shirts.
I see some.
I wanted to ask about maybe if you can talk a little about some of the specific techniques that you like to use to visualize things that are normally really intangible, like anxiety, depression, compulsion, or things that are going on in your head that are, you know, normally I think those are hard to visualize on a page. And I'm just curious, like, are there any specific kind of ways you like to visualize it that you found to be really effective? I'm just curious to see some of the different styles or to hear what some of your guys' thoughts are.
On my comic on Healing Us, I spent like a little bit of time doing visual development for that. And I mean, we were talking a little bit like style earlier, and like there's a reason like why Healing Us is like so messy throughout it. Like I use a lot of just like lots of scribbles and lines all over the place. And I also use like, because it's black and white, I have a lot of focus on contrast. So it's like, you know, contrasting the white versus black, and then also like in between the, like a gradient in between. But yeah, I use like, I think it's kind of cool to like think about that, like the cleanliness of a line versus the messiness of a line, I think can say a lot.
Yeah, to add on that, I feel like messiness feels like, it's what your head feels like when you're going through something like mentally or anxious. And I know I have on one of my slides, I think, even like the borders get scribbly. And also I started doing just like this sort of pattern of like a circle surrounding you, but it's like a lot of like black lines. I've accidentally like incorporated that into a lot of my work to be like, this is anxiety happening. Because it's hard to describe like what you're feeling sometimes, because it's like, I don't know why I'm anxious, but I know I'm anxious. It's like being surrounded by an aura. So that's why I really love comics in terms of talking about mental health, because there's so much internally that you can't always put into words. So comics are the perfect medium of like, okay, well when you have the words, you can use them, but when you can't, don't worry, you can just draw it out. So it's become like my own accidental emanada.
One thing I wanted to point out in Alex's book that I think is really masterful, I don't know if you have a slide of it, but you have a second self that's your anxiety self that has like horns kind of, and is sort of like part of the app. It's really amazing, actually. Like, so there's like the Alex that's public facing, and then the like kind of the negative speaking self, and that's something that happens in a comic easily that would be maybe you could do an animation, but it just works beautifully in a comic, and I think that's cool that you.
I think we also see that
off.
in Emma's book as well. If I have a slide
yeah.
here, another self comes up on the bed.
We love bullying ourselves.
Yeah, the way I did my book is because I was basically remembering it as I was writing it. So the way I did it was basically like on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, I'd fold them into, so that, you know, folded in half so that it was 4 panels. Because it was important that I remembered everything quickly as I was remembering it. So like later on I combined the 2 8.5 by 11 pages to make one big 11 by 17, and that's what they copied. But for me, I just hashed out everything as I remembered it in super, super quick sketches. Just sometimes it would just be a circle for the head, or just the eyes, or, you know, or just the hands or something. And then later on, so I would just hash out these pages as quickly as I could get them out as I was remembering them. And then later on, I would go back and clean up the drawings a little bit, and then light table it, and then with a brush pen ink over that.
And this is no error here. You intentionally left this panel black, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, black was a big narrative device where like basically I had a lot of blackouts, but also narratively black. Also, later on I use it to indicate abuse. Like if you're an abusive person, you're seen as a black silhouette. But it basically was a blackout in time, which is why the black was used here.
Right.
So.
Could we take another question, Dan? I saw some over here on the. They've had my back. I've had my back to them for so long. Was there a question over here, or did I? Oh, okay, over there. We make the guy in the boot. Bring the microphone around.
First of all, I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. It's just great to see the continuation of this conversation, and it's really incredible to see how much work about mental health is happening right now. And I am familiar with, two of you, and I can see that, all of these works are so unique, and thank you. Gabriel, I met you yesterday, and I had the opportunity to meet your book, to read your book. And I just wanted to say that I thought the way that you approached even the title, Healing Us, was so powerful. And I think that in my own work that I've done about mental health, mental illness, it's been very individual, but the way that you set up with the introduction and the way that you offer resources was just such an amazing way to approach this. And I don't know the further work you're doing, whether it's going to expand on things or not, but I just thought that it was so smart and really, really good to take people to the next place.
Thank you so much.
So good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. We've got some people in the wing too.
Oh, well, he's,
Yeah.
do you mind if I just mention something?
No, of course.
Is that Rachel Lindsay?
That is
Oh,
Rachel
okay.
Lindsay.
Oh, okay, because your book, RX, Marbles by 4NA, and Fun Home were 3 really inspirational books that gave me the courage to do my book. So without those 3 books, I don't think I would have had the courage to do it. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Oh, thanks.
Who has our next question?
Hi. I was just wondering how you deal with loneliness and not finding community amongst your peers, because the art scene is such a close-knit community, and not finding people you resonate with is such an isolating experience. So how would you deal with that?
Oof, yeah. Very relatable.
It is super isolating. That's like this sad truth that you don't want to tell people when you're making a comic, is like how alone you are making it sometimes. Like, it takes so long. And so these kind of festivals are like oxygen, really, for cartoonists, because we just go back to our little hole and try to finish. You try to connect like on Zoom or with, doing video things and whatever, but it's really not the same. And just being in the presence of others. So that's why it's really important that MICE exists for us, and that there are other shows too in different states that I'll travel to go to. I'll make the distance just for that precious connection.
Would it be also fair to say social media, the Twitter and Instagram communities?
It
lending
does help.
themselves?
Yeah,
It has.
it's not the same. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Also, it's just, sometimes it's a garbage pool lately.
Yeah.
So you're like, I'm searching for friends, but also now I'm miserable.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I actually made Improve was because I was having a lot of trouble with loneliness, where I had just graduated. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City, where I was like surrounded by so many cool artists and cartoonists and friends. And then all of a sudden I was in like the middle of Rhode Island with my parents in a town where I did not grow up in, so I couldn't even like rekindle relationships. So it was very lonely. And one of the reasons I started taking improv, like aside from the mental health benefits, was because I just needed an excuse to get out of the house. So sometimes, unfortunately, like you're not immediately gonna find your artist community, but I do feel like just going out and trying new things, it's very difficult. It's very hard to like push yourself to just do it. But I do think it's very beneficial, even if it's just like taking a class or doing like a workshop at the library or something like that. But in terms of like fostering like a specific cartooning comics community, online is sort of the good place to start at times, and I think mostly just because of like pandemic times, there's not really a lot of opportunities to go out to locations. But sometimes you can find Discords for like specific areas, or I know for me, like I still kept in touch with like all my friends from college, so I was like still talking with them, but yeah, it's hard because even when you still have those friends, that loneliness does still hit a lot. And I think the important thing to know, at least drawing related to that, is that's why it's so important to draw for yourself, because you need to do something that's making you happy in a time where you're already going through, like, you don't have as much of a support system as you would like at the moment. So make sure you're not just drawing for work. Make sure you're drawing to make yourself happy and remind yourself why you started drawing in the first place.
I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions. Yes?
Hi. I kind of have two questions. So the first one is, I guess, like, what's daunting to me with the concept of, like, sharing stuff like that. Like, I was, like, working on a comic so that I'd have something to, like, bring here. And it's, and I've done, like, that's a little mini memoir, and I've done, like, little, like, short memoir type comics about mental health before. And I think the struggle is always, there's kind of that negative self-talk every time you're, like, want to do this, because it's like, oh God, like, am I just, like, you know, screaming into the void, like, moping, and, like, it's embarrassing, and what if the wrong person sees it? And I guess just, like, how do you get past that and just kind of are, like, convincing yourself that you have the right to talk about it? So that's one. Second, I guess specifically for Alex, because your book that you're doing with For Second, I'm very jealous, you're living my dream. I'd love to know, because marketing is one of the talking points, just, like, how did you find yourself there? How did you do that? How does that happen? You know, I'd love to know.
Honestly, I think I let myself be weird. Like, I think for so long I was, like, restricting it. But one of the things that, like, I learned through improv, which is another reason, like, one of the reasons I did this book is because I would not shut up about improv. It's because I kept learning so many cool things just about, like, socializing, and I was like, and did you know this happens and that? And then I was like, I should just write it down, so I stopped bothering everybody. And that also ties into your first question, where, like, I prefer to yell into the void, because if I'm just, like, talking to one person, like, oversharing, I feel kind of bad. But at least with the void, it's like, well, if someone needs it, it'll be there. But if not, I'm still putting it out there, I'm still getting it away from me. But going back to improv for a second, one of the things we learn is unlearning self-censorship, which is, like, one of the big problems we have, where we're constantly overthinking. It's such a big thing with anxiety and mental health. And that, obviously, that's, like, a hindrance when you're in scenes and just trying to pull something. Like, a lot of times you'll be like, you'll want to do the obvious thing and be like, no, I have to put a twist on it. Like, I can't fall into the cliches. But that's what you should be doing, because it's like, it's the first thing that came to your head. Just go with it. Like, and it's something to fall back on, and it's something to twist into your own eventually. So I think just from the practice of taking things, like, a step at a time, just learning to not, like, cut myself off for things. Like, a lot of times I would want to make a stupid joke and I would stop myself, and then I just got to a point where, like, now I'm going to make all the stupid jokes. And that's unfortunately bled into all of my normal conversations now. So it's just kind of like letting yourself be you, and if that's weird, like, power to it. Like, lean into that, because you never know, like, for some people that is something they have not seen before, and they're going to love you for it. Like, I feel like all the time I feel like I'm way too weird for where I'm supposed to be, and then they're like, oh my God, you're so funny, and I'm like, okay. So if you just kind of reach a point where you're just like, oh yeah, like, I've done this before, and they didn't shun me, so I'll just keep doing it. Like, it's no problem with it. It's just practice, basically.
Jumping off of that is just like, you know, you might never be ready. I mean, I'm early in my comics thing, and, like, even making Healing Us was just really difficult, where I was like, I don't know if I want to release this. I put enough disclaimers in this where I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I'm not the right person to talk about this too. But at the end of the day, it's just like, I take what Spider-Verse says, where it's like, it's a leap of faith. You might never be ready. So just do it. I'm excited to see what you make.
And also, to add on to that, another important thing is, like, we are in a very social media heavy culture where we have to share everything. It's also okay to just make it and keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, like, obviously we would love to see more of that, but it's like, if you're not ready to share it, that's okay, but don't, like, stop yourself from actually making it, especially if it's going to help you, like, not only express yourself, but sort of work through your own feelings.
Yeah. And in my experience, the things that I was making, I would think I was done, it would be over, and it would, like, keep coming back. And so I either deal with, like, okay, I'll keep working on you, or I'll stop. But if it's if you're motivated enough, if you're excited enough, if you feel like it's worth it, you'll do it. Like it's, you know, you just have to do it.
Do we have time for one more question? I'm going to make you go all the way to the other side of the room.
Poor Dan has a dome.
I should, while Dan is doing that, point out our panel partners. Everyone enjoy that? Good. I'm glad we're all on the same page now.
Hi. So first off, thanks so much for doing this panel. For those of you under the age of 30, I wish I could give you the stability of the 90s.
Stability of the 90s. I never thought I'd hear that.
For those of you under, I hope these folks are doing their jobs. Just going back to this at the beginning, briefly, handling and governing and the size of your pages is kind of the breadth of the comic. Is there anything you feel like that you work with that, especially in this kind of space?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because actually when Alex was talking, I was thinking about how the structure of comics is a structure, like, and it gives you something to plug yourself into, and there's a comfort there. Like when you're just scribbling in your sketchbook and making a bunch of marks and it's all over the place, it's maybe not as satisfying as when you've got the panels, you know, and you've got your thought bubbles and your word bubbles and your pacing, and like you've got all these rules you can make up. And what's really special about comics is each artist creates their own rules for the book. We all have different rules about how we are doing our books. And we don't even know the rules until we start making the book, and then the book kind of makes the rules, and you're like, oh, now these are the rules. And somehow, I think there's a comfort in that. I don't know if you've had that experience of being like, oh, this, like it's a partnership with the grid or the structure or however you're doing it.
I've definitely found that, like, growing up, one of the things that made me super anxious, like, even just from a school perspective, like, if they gave me an essay and were like, you can write about anything, no, that's too much. That's too overwhelming, too many options. But, like, with comics, it's like, oh, assign these specific moments you have already lived through, so you already know what happens, into boxes. So it's basically like if you're playing Tetris in your closet and just rearranging stuff, that's kind of what it feels like. And so it feels like it's not as overwhelming. And then as far as like the size of panels go, it's like making what feels most important in the moment, like the biggest. Or if there are like a lot of tiny moments that feel like very stressful, I feel like I'm just re-explaining comics. I just feel like they just lend themselves so well to like depicting this kind of stuff.
I want to, first of all, thank the audience. You have been wonderful today, and this conversation is always unfolding. Hope you'll continue it on your own and on the show floor. Let's also thank our panelists one more time. Thank you all very much, and have a great afternoon.